And thank you for continuing BSB 41507 Certificate 4 in Project Management. I am Trudy Robinson. This presentation will cover some of the aspects of roles and responsibilities. The objectives of this session are for you to understand and apply knowledge of the allocation of resources, individuals or organisations to your project tasks, and also to understand some of the ongoing management requirements relating to resources and HR. The PMBOK 4 references Chapter 9, particularly pages 217 to 223. In simple terms, we are looking at what tasks need to be done, who's required to undertake those tasks, when they are required and when they are required to be available, why you should use one resource, individual or company, over anyone else, the allocation of the approved resources to the tasks, the records management and the day-to-day management. And of course the allocation of tasks, the identification of resources, etc. is usually an ongoing requirement throughout the course of the project. So, who is required? The previous presentation has already looked at the need to identify the tasks and detail them in a work breakdown structure. So we'll move on to who is required in order to be able to undertake those tasks. In order to be able to identify clearly who is required, it is necessary that you identify the role. You particularly define the authority of the person or resource that will be undertaking the tasks, including the decisions that they will be able to make and the resources that they will be in control of. You will also need to clarify their responsibility, in particular, what they must achieve during the course of the project in key result areas and key performance indicators. Competency also plays a key role in identifying who is required regarding their skills, qualifications and experience. Equally as important as identifying the tasks and the resources available is to ensure that the project time frame or timeline clearly indicates when those resources will be required, so that you are able to identify whether those resources will be available, which will have a big impact on whether you will be choosing them to be part of the project team. Equally as important is ensuring that those resources do not have conflicting projects, so that you have their total focus and priority. And if they are in a full-time job as well as being allocated to project tasks, it is important to ensure that their managers have total buy-in to the project and that you have good communication with those personnel. It's also important to identify whether these resources will need to be travelling as part of the project, either to you from where they may be based or from where you're working to other geographical areas based on the tasks within the project. This will not only affect the budget, but it may also affect their commitment if they are away from their home base for long periods of time. It's also important to ensure that all the critical personnel and resources required for the project are committed for the full project's duration. We've already mentioned some of the competencies regarding skill, experience and qualifications. However, some of the other considerations that may come into play regarding the selection of the resources is their competencies, as we've mentioned, the availability regarding the timeline, but it may also be down to testimonials and recommendations from their previous projects. Budget may also come into play depending on their rates, whether they are a permanent employee, casual or contractor. These resources may cost more and therefore have a bigger impact. Again, returning to the competencies, you need to believe that the individual resource or team can come to the table with the relevant aptitude. Aptitude and attitude is often a greater benefit to your project than skill in itself. Once you have the project tasks identified, the timeline in place and the resources selected, the next steps are to list the resources in the project management document, in the project plan, and allocate those resources to the tasks. Once you have this done, it's important to be able to filter and or report by each resource so that you are able to identify the status of the tasks that those resources are allocated to, and to ensure that you are able to clearly report to each individual or resource or organisation so that you can show them exactly what they are allocated to. As in any type of business, verbal discussions and agreements mean nothing. It is important to document what these resources will be doing, particularly if you're advertising. A full position description is appropriate and will clarify exactly what you require of these resources. An organisational chart or RACI matrix will assist in clarifying exactly what's required of them and who's reporting to whom. Contracts are obviously a formal legal document which will be an ongoing reference in case of any future disputes, and if possible get the commitments for the timeframes, etc. in writing. An example of a matrix, particularly a RACI matrix, is included in the PMBOK 4, and everyone's of course familiar with an organisational diagram which can be part of your general project plan documentation. Position descriptions, as I mentioned before, are more useful for advertising, but then once they are in place, everyone can be very clear about what is required of the resources allocated. This is probably more appropriate for a long-term project, not something which is going to be started and completed within a few months, for example. Within a position description or a project, it's often necessary to clarify the key result area within working answers. A key result area is some aspect of the project where the results are critical in order for the project to be considered a success. So this is describing the general area that will be affected or analysed within the project, and a KPI or a key performance indicator or a number of them may be listed to detail the exact steps or objectives that will be achieved in order for the KRA to be considered a success. Be clear in what is specifically required of each resource or individual or organisation. In summary, identify who you need and what you need. Don't just take a spare body because it happens to be available. Be clear in your expectations and the project's requirements, where the resources' responsibilities start and finish. Know your team members. Their personal lives may not be something you should be involved in, but if you're not, or if somebody doesn't know what's going on, then it may affect your professional standing. Put as much as you can into writing. Be formal in your documentation. Assessment criteria. The tool you use to record and allocate roles and responsibilities and to analyse these on an ongoing basis will be part of your source and your tool used to develop position descriptions.